Now, newly minted Secretary of State Tony Blinken saying Iran is out of compliance on a number of fronts. He also went on to say that it'll take the administration quite some time before the U.S. agrees to get back into the JCPOA. Now, this coming on the heels of a new public spat between Tel Aviv and Tehran. For a closer examination, we're being joined now by former UK MP George Galloway. So, George, one of Joe Biden's campaign promises was that he'd return the U.S. to the JCPOA, although he didn't say when exactly. That said, what's changed since his initial promise?
Well, he also said he'd be sending out $2,000 checks, and he's not showing any signs of reaching for the checkbook. He also promised to end support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen, and again, no early signs that that is his intention to do so. It's enough to make a horse laugh, I must tell you, an American administration talking about Iran being out of compliance. The only reason Iran's out of compliance is because the United States ripped up the deal. If the United States wants Iran to move back into compliance, it'll have to rejoin the deal. So here we have what would appear to be an impasse or a catch-22. The United States is applying conditions on Iran, which of course are only in existence because of the United States' actions and not Iran's. So you've got to think that powerful forces overseas as well as internal in the United States are pressing the Biden administration not to go back into the nuclear deal, which will be a massive disappointment to European governments who had pinned a lot of their hopes in Joe Biden on this subject.
Now, what of the remarks supposedly made by the Iranians that, quote, the slightest mistake by Israel would lead the Islamic Republic to level Haifa and Tel Aviv?
Well, this is in response to the Israeli report that you've just quoted, that they are planning a strike on Iran if the entry into the JCPOA actually happens. They are recklessly endangering the peace of the entire region. And as someone who doesn't want to see anywhere leveled, neither Tehran nor Haifa, a city I know well, I should say, or Tel Aviv, where I have actually lived, I don't want to see any of these places leveled. And so that kind of rhetoric is very, very much to be regretted.
And Israel does seem keen to keep the U.S. from returning to the JCPOA, but why? I mean, if they claim they want to keep Iran from nuclear capabilities, isn't that the whole point of the JCPOA?
Indeed, and Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon, as the IAEA, which polices these matters, repeatedly made clear. So if your goal really is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, the best thing you could do is get fully immersed in the JCPOA. It was working, which made the Trump administration's ripping up of the deal all the more reprehensible. Now, of course, Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons, and the IAEA does not police them because Israel refuses to acknowledge that it has them. The only reason we know that it has them is because of the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu, who spent 20 years in solitary for telling us the story.
And lastly, George, how do you see this new rhetoric being exchanged between Tel Aviv and Tehran affecting events in Syria?
Well, of course, that's a real danger because Syria is a proxy battleground between the two states. Israel doesn't really intend to attack Iran because Iran has the wherewithal to attack it back. And Israel's a very small country, quite densely populated cities. So where else can you attack Iran? Well, you can attack Syria and call it Iran. You could say you're striking Iranian influence in Syria, as if you can strike an idea, a religion, an ideology. And it's a very dangerous path because, of course, in Syria, there are not just Iranian militias. and Lebanese militias. There's the might of the Russian armed forces, Navy, Air Force, and Army. So any shooting at Syria risks a wider and multinational, international conflagration. Very dangerous talk. These are dangerous times. Netanyahu is floundering, about to go to jail, wondering whether he's going to be re-elected and thus postpone the jail term. So why not ramp up the talk of war? It's a wag the dog maneuver, very well known since the Hollywood movie of that name.
Absolutely. It would be a very risky gamble to make on Syria on Israel's part. We'll see how this shakes out. Always appreciate your take on this. George Galloway, thank you.